Welcome, everyone. My name is Andrea Sampson, and I'm the CEO and founder of Talk Boutique and the Thought Leader Academy. And this is Conversations with Thought Leaders. And today I'm privileged to have Mr. Richard Blundell. Richard, I've known for many years. He is a senior executive with over 40 years of executive management and consulting experience in the global sustainability and ESG world. He has a special expertise in technology sectors. He has experience in operations management, corporate and market development, mergers, acquisitions, new business initiation, and consulting. Richard today is the CEO of a company called, um, uh, oh
Fauna
gosh, it's
photonics.
just photophotonics. It just
Fauna,
immediately
fauna,
went out.
fauna
Fauna
photonics.
Photonics,
Yeah,
Fauna Photonics,
yeah,
and which is a company that is focused in biodiversity.
yeah.
Now, as a sustainability expert, and welcome, Richard. Thank you for joining
Thank you.
me. I'm
Oh,
so
it's
appreciative having you here.
great to be here. I'm really looking forward to this.
Fantastic. Now, sustainability is something that we hear a lot about. And of course, as individuals, there's lots of things we could be doing for sustainability. But I think one of the biggest challenges has been over the years is having businesses to really focus on and understand sustainability and what they can do to actually help beyond just doing things like carbon credits. And this has been a tough message in the corporate sector for many, many years. And I know you've been living that for a lot of years, but you're now working in the area of biodiversity. And maybe you can help us to understand, first of all, how do the two connect and are they different?
Yeah, no, it's a good question, Andrea. Thank you, and really great to be here. I've been looking forward to this. So thanks for having me. So they're very different. Either they're very well, they're connected. They are as climate is connected to biodiversity. They're sort of intertwined. I mean, you can't separate one from the other. They actually they both affect each other. Biodiversity, though, is really um, the definition of biodiversity is the variety of animals, fauna, flora, and microorganism in any given area. So it's basically, if you take a look at nature, it's a natural ecosystem, and it's everything that exists within that given ecosystem. And it obviously relies there's a very fine balance of how that ecosystem works and all of the flora, fauna, microorganisms, and everything else, that living organisms that live in that ecosystem. Sustainability is more. I always think about sustainability as long-term sustained resource efficiency and resilience that delivers enhanced social, environmental, and economic outcomes. So sustainability is sort of the broader picture, if you like
Mhm.
climate is the broader
Right.
picture. Biodiversity is the natural world. So, why is that important? The natural world is super important to us because basically 50% of the GDP globally, $58 trillion, comes from nature. And I think if
Mm.
you, Andrea, and all the listeners are to look in the rooms that they're sitting in right now, you'd be hard pressed to say that there's nothing in that room that doesn't come from nature. Everything in
Mm.
that room comes from nature.
Right. So if I got this right, so I think what I just heard you say was that first of all, we've got climate change. That's sort of the broadest way in which to look at this world. And then within climate change, we have sustainability. It is the way in which we're addressing climate change, the systems, the structures, the way we are choosing to impact it. And then within sustainability, we have to look at the nature that we're impacting. And so biodiversity is saying, okay, our efforts within sustainability will either help or hinder our biodiversity. Do I have that
Yeah,
correct?
I think I would flip it a little bit. I'd say that
Uh,
the overriding umbrella is climate
right.
change, of which biodiversity is a component. Sustainability is So sustainability is a journey. It's not an outcome. So innovation is an outcome. Innovation is manifested in a business model, profit, or something like that. Sustainability is a journey that never really ends. And so it's a
Right.
series of enhanced outcomes, all of which needs to actually address the environment, social impact, and economic impact, right? So all three of them need to be present to be sustainable. And sustainability is this concept of, efficiency and resiliency in an ecosystem, right? And so companies use sustainability as their umbrella to measure how they actually perform within, their ecosystem, their industrial or institutional ecosystems. Climate is really the overriding umbrella that we think about when we think of the world, in the
Right.
natural world, and then biodiversity is a component of that.
Of the natural world, right.
Yeah,
So they really sit side by side is what I'm hearing, like,
yeah,
one is a system, and the other
yeah,
one is almost the raw materials, that the system uses in many
yeah,
ways. Yeah.
yeah,
And
yeah.
so, um, and just before we go to my next question, I also just wanna reach out to all of our listeners today and say, please put some questions in the chat. We love to hear from you, and we'd love to be able to answer your questions. So make sure that you are putting them in there, and we will make sure to address them throughout today's conversation. So, Richard, you know, we know that companies all have, it has been for many years, a focus on sustainability. We hear it all the time. Um,
Yeah.
but when we look at those sustainable, that sustainability focused, isn't that enough? Haven't we already done the things that we needed to do?
No, I think we're not even close. The reality is that there's so many different components to sustainability. When you think about it from a practice standpoint, from a business standpoint, there's a whole bunch of layers that one needs to think about. And sustainability has impact on all of those layers, whether they're social layers, environmental layers, or economic layers. Sustainable development is this notion of basically ensuring that there are enough resources for the current generation to consume and also for all future generations to consume. So it's this trade-off of resource efficiency and resiliency, right? Like, are we behaving today, this generation, in a manner that's actually going to allow for future generations to prosper? And then you sort of
Hmm.
get into, well, what does prosperity mean? And that's where we get into things like, how, poverty, and sort of, what is the right standard of living that should be applicable across the globe for everybody, right? So it is a series of trade-offs. And the answer to that question at the moment is we are not behaving sustainably at the moment, right? We're not consuming resources. We're not creating ecosystem resiliency in this generation, which will allow for future generations to prosper. That's the challenge that we have.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a powerful statement, right? Like, we are and I think we've heard this. We are borrowing from our future
Yeah.
generations right now. And you know, first of all, that's really not okay. We're living a good life, but it's on somebody else's expense, and that's going to come back and bite us, right? So when you talk about resiliency, and I've heard you say that a couple of times,
Yeah.
and the resiliency within the system, the resiliency within our ecosystems, within our biodiversity, why should businesses care about that? Because, okay, sure, we're borrowing from future generations, but businesses often don't care about that. Should they?
Well,
And
yeah,
why
they
should they
co-
care? Yeah, go ahead.
yeah. So let's just talk about this on a maybe a little bit of a broader context. So if you think about resiliency and you think about climate change and sustainability, there's really sort of three threads that we need to think about. One is we need to think about mitigation. So how do we actually minimize the impact that we're generating today, so that future generations can actually prosper? The second one is, given the fact that, you know, and we see this, with climate change, that we're in a world that has got a little bit more unpredictable weather. The weather systems are a little more erratic, and they are also a little more violent, if you like. How do we actually transition, right, from where we are today to be able to get to a world that is more imbalanced, more resilient. And the last one is adaptation, which is really what I was getting at in the previous comment, which is, now that the world has changed and the weather has become more extreme, how do we actually adapt to this new world? So
Mm.
it's about mitigation, it's about transition, and it's about adaptation. And I think that's the way to think about it. When you think about it from a business context, why does it matter for business? So there's lots of evidence around the business case for sustainability. But my favorite example is Interface. Interface is a US-based company that is the world's largest manufacturer of commercial carpet tiles. And the leader of that company, Ray Anderson, many years ago, was asked by a customer, "What are you guys doing about sustainability?" Didn't even know how to answer it. So he went back and did some research, discovered that all of their inputs, a lot of their inputs, were actually based on fossil fuels and their processes and everything they did. So they were completely unsustainable. And so he created a path. He called it Mount Sustainability, and he equated it to climbing Everest. And he had, I think, 7 or 8 different steps to get to the top. And the top was redesign commerce. And what he saw, first of all, by creating this incredibly ambitious vision, is that he energized the organization. When you create a vision like that takes your breath away, you actually energize the organization. So he got
Mm.
more out of the organization. But the reality is that their costs were down, not up. So that's a false choice. And the issue with sustainability that I always talk about is that sustainability is a mindset. If
Mm.
your mindset is a cost mindset, so it's I always say the problem with sustainability is that we're selling death insurance rather than life insurance. Death insurance is the cost argument. If you see sustainability simply as a cost, you will never be able to see the opportunity, which is really the life insurance side of that. So it is a mindset. And so what Anderson did was he said, we're going to change our mindsets so that we actually see this as an opportunity. So this notion of cost going up, false choice, absolute nonsense. It's not true at all. And he built better, his organization innovated better. He retained and kept the best employees. He retained and kept the best customers. He had an enormous impact on the goodwill of the marketplace, which he always said, our message, our brand is more authentic than it ever has been before. So he talked about authenticity. He talked about goodwill in the marketplace. And I mean, his favorite or my favorite saying that he coined was, it's a better way to make a bigger profit, not at expense of future generations and the
Mm.
earth, which gets back to where we started with sustainable development, not at the expense of future generations
Right.
and the planet, right? And so it's super important because it delivers huge,
And
outcomes.
yeah, so I want to go to that example because I think it's really, really powerful. So he
Yeah,
said, look, we need to change the way we work because what we're doing is not sustainable. He went within his ecosystem and he changed that ecosystem. So he looked for sustainable partners. He looked for sustainable materials. He
yeah,
created an entirely new, sort of chain of supply that allowed him to actually focus on sustainability. And by doing that, what he did was he created a new vision for his company.
yeah.
He created deeper and greater employee engagement, and he saved money.
Yeah, and Paul Pullman did the same thing when he announced sustainable living at Unilever. His biggest observation was that he was getting more out of the organization because it was a purpose-led organization, right? So people know why they're going to work every day. Because the objectives were, one of which was to take millions of people out of poverty. So when you go to work and that is the objective of you being there every day, that's super motivating, right? So he
Yeah.
found that by creating purpose and by creating a purpose-led organization, which is what Ray did, you actually understand why they're there every day. There's a great story that Ray tells of, they had some people, they had a consulting business that actually helped other companies go through the same transition that they gone through. And there was a company that was from Europe, and they were there, and there was somebody that was being very obstructive in the morning meetings, and really trying to sort of not really interested in what was going on. There was a bathroom break at some point, and this person walked through the plant, stopped a forklift driver, and said, "What is your job here?" And the guy looked at this individual and said, "I'm here to save the planet." And so this individual was like shocked, and drew this guy out more and more about, what does that mean to you? And he finally stopped this person and said, "Look, if I don't get this roll of carpet to that machine, our emissions are going to go out of control." And it was a great example of a mission and a vision that got right to the factory
Right.
floor. He called it
Wow.
love on the factory floor, right?
Right.
And it's a great story, and that's super powerful, right?
Well, so, what I'm hearing in this, and some people may be familiar with the concept of the triple bottom line, right? It's,
Yeah.
people, planet, and profit. And I think you're adding the fourth piece to that, which is purpose. And, when we have all of these things in balance, because I think one of the challenges of business has been that it's been about, people and profit. And those planet never really played a role. And so now we're starting to bring planet into it because it has to be part of the conversation, but equally so does purpose. And, because purpose
Yeah.
and planet really have to be kind of almost one thing. But in that, what happens, we're talking about, the opportunity, but what happens what if companies just don't bother? Like, is there a risk? Do they just do, okay, maybe there's a risk to our future generations, but what's the short-term risk for them?
So there's a lot of risks. I think the risks are they're not going to hire, attract, and retain the best employees. You can say the same thing about customers. They're not going to be as profitable because their costs are going to be up, not down. But they're not going to, importantly, they're just not going to get access to capital, right? The financial markets have now said, if you guys aren't able to tell us what kind of risks that you're carrying as a business, and those risks are the ones that we're talking about that are specifically associated with ecological ecosystems and social ecosystems too,
Wow.
because it matters, right? It matters that the transition that we're going through now is a just transition for everybody. Because and I'll give you an example. So we were talking about this just before we got on, and I never finished the story, so I will now.
Yeah. Yeah.
The reality is that the global south, right, already is carrying the damages of climate change on its balance sheet, because they have to keep paying over and over again for all these destructive storms that go through, which is being generated by the emissions from the global north. The challenge is that these countries are already in debt, trying to actually continuously rebuild. The world financial system, which was built at the end of the Second World War, those objectives no longer apply to this part of the world. And the problem is that these systems, these institutions are so out of date. And the other issue is that in terms of what they're trying to accomplish and what their mandates are. And the other problem is that the global south is borrowing at double-digit interest rates, and the global north is borrowing at low single-digit, interest rate. So it's like a vicious circle, right? The global south never gets out of this. It gets
Wow.
worse and
So
worse and worse.
so the South is enduring the impact of climate change at a greater rate because of just the way that climate change is happening, where it's
Yep,
warmer, where the South gets hit by climate change harder.
yep,
Because
yep,
they get hit by climate change harder, the businesses within it are taxed at a greater rate, and they have to actually pay for it. The global
yeah,
north is the contributor to climate
yep.
change.
The
Um,
cause.
driving what's happening to the south. And our monetary system treats the north and the south exactly the same. Therefore, the south is seen as being a greater draw upon the monetary system, therefore higher interest rates. And yet there are a greater draw on the monetary fund because of climate change and because of what the north is doing. So they're sort of in a bit of a vicious cycle right now. Do I have
Yeah.
that
So
correct?
the only thing I would change there is that the monetary systems don't treat the south and the north the same. They treat the North differently than the South, and that's
But
part of the problem.
but why though? Why are they treating the
Well,
North differently?
just think about it, right? So think about the risks associated with lending into the global South that is continuously rebuilding.
Right. Yeah. And that's sort of what I was getting at, is that it's treating them the same in that it looks at them and says, well, you're a high risk, you're a low
You're,
risk. But it's not looking at that the North is creating the risk in the South. So it's just it's judging them on risk, not on what is actually causing
risk and stability and resilience and all those things that matter, right? So those
right.
are risks, and think about it. Like, what else do you sort of think about? Risks are related to productivity. How can you be productive if you're always growing? You're rebuilding. Risks are
Mhm.
associated with competitiveness. How can you be competitive if you're always having to
Mhm.
rebuild? Like all these things, brand related risk.
Right.
These are all risks that the global South it's just multiplied in the global South, but the effects of that are being generated by the actions that are being taken in the global North. And the global North is favored by the system because they say, okay, you don't have the same climate risks that the global South
Right.
does. You don't. There's also stability related issues, political issues, all that
Yeah.
sort of stuff. But at the end of the day, this international financial institution or ecosystem of institutions has not been built and has not been designed to actually address what's happening in the world today.
Mhm.
It was built and to address the rebuilding of the world after a world war,
Mm.
right?
So
And that's so different, totally different objectives, right?
So when we look out there, like, so these are all the things that are. What can we do? What is are things being done? Is there some good news that you can look
Yeah.
to hear and hear, and like what's the solution, or what can we help people to see differently?
So I think that it gets back to mindset, right? It's what lens are you going to look at this? Is it the death insurance lens or the life insurance lens? So climate and biodiversity are the two biggest commercial opportunities of our time. It's probably in the hundreds of trillions of dollars over the next 3 decades or less than 3 decades, because we really have to make a difference by 2050. And the reality is that the 2030 targets that have been set to reduce emissions, some of the latest reports that I've read say that 93% of companies are going to miss those targets. So, the challenge here is that you have two reactions. One is, well, Bob missed it, and Fred missed it, and Sally missed it, and Andrea missed it. So who cares, right? We all missed it together. Big deal. And that's what I worry about. The other thing is that the other reaction is general panic ensues because all of a sudden the 2050 goal is not a 50% reduction, it's an 80% reduction or a 70% reduction. And it's like, how do I get there in so little time? So there's a lot of capital available in the market, and what needs to happen is it needs to be put to work, right? And so I always say that technology is part of the answer, but it's not the entire answer. Business model innovation is just as big a part of the answer as technology is, because if we're going to rely on silver bullets, which I don't believe in, the reality is it takes on average somewhere between 20 to 40 years for new innovation to get to market at scale, right? Like if we talk about, fusion or direct air capture technologies, which are the big, a lot of people are talking about, like decades away, right, for it to get to scale. So we don't have that amount of time. So we have to think about how can we actually take what we have now and bring it to markets in a much more efficient, effective, and resilient manner, right? Like how can we rethink our business models so that we can actually get it to market and so that everyone prospers from it, not just the North, the rich, right? And so it's a very complex issue. And when we start talking about biodiversity, it gets even more complex.
So it sounds like there's no easy answer here, but I think the first thing that everyone should be doing, from what I can hear, is look at our business practices. What can we do? Like, even because we're going to run out of time, as you're saying, 2050 is not that far away. And we have time right now. So what can we do right now? What is one thing that we could send out there to businesses to say, if you do nothing else, do this one thing, and at least
So
you're contributing.
yeah. So I don't have I would provide a different message than just one thing. When you look at the size of the prize, the size of the opportunity, basic, and because we have to rethink pretty much everything. The reality is the opportunity is to reimagine the future.
Hmm.
That's enormously exciting, right? If you go to work every day, I worked for a guy named Sergio Marchioni for a number of years, who was the best CEO I ever had the real privilege of working with, or working for, sorry. Um, he used to tell us that, you know, he's looking for people who want to change the world every day, that have no fear in actually trying to do that. And that actually their purpose is to actually leave, he used to say, leave the house in better order than when you arrived in the morning,
Yeah.
right? So if that's the way that you think, and he would say to us, you've got to look for discontinuities in your business model, discontinuities in the market. It needs to be a way of life. You can't plan it. It just has to be something that you do every day. When you sort of have that optic and you have that level of optimism, okay, I'm going to change the world. I'm not going to have any fear. I really want to build a purpose-built, sort of purpose-built organization, which energizes everybody that's attached to it. That's a very exciting prospect. Let's reimagine the future. Let's not just focus on one thing. Let's think about, how can we actually reimagine our businesses? How can we reimagine the impacts that we generate on a day-to-day basis? How can we reimagine our business models? How can we reimagine our processes around innovation? All of that is up for grabs.
Hmm. That is powerful, Richard. Let's reimagine our future. I think that's the one thing. And it's big, but it doesn't have to be, because reimagining a future says, all right, I can contribute towards a co-created future. We each can do that. It's something I talk about all the time with the work that I do, because I truly do believe that thought leaders, everybody who is in some way speaking in a leadership role, is co-creating a future. And when we're doing that and we start to understand how we're co-creating that future, we can be more intentional in it, and we can create sustainable practices within that. So each person, what I love about what you said was, it doesn't matter where you are in the organization. It's
No,
about looking at what you're doing and saying, how does what I do leave this house a little better than when I got here?
yeah,
We were talking again before we came on the air about, we're really not very good guests on this Mother Earth. We've been the guests that aren't going to get invited back. Well, maybe we can change that, right? Maybe we can each do something and clean up our own room and make sure our bed is made. And if we each do that, that will contribute in a way, especially when we're thinking about it through the lens of reimagining the future.
yeah, I agree with you. So I'll leave you with one message, because I think it's one thing that we haven't talked about today, which I want to just leave with people. And that is that it's really important that we take care of our house, in this case, Mother Earth, nature, because what we're currently experiencing is an unprecedented loss of nature. And we're in the middle of what we call a sixth mass extinction event. And the extinction rates are 100 to 1,000 times higher than we've ever seen anywhere else in the 5 other events in the fossil record. We've lost 40% of all nature, flora and fauna, since 1970. Gone. You know, and these ecosystems are very fragile. They work very carefully together, and they're tipping points. And when you hit the tipping points, there's no going back. And so I would urge people to think about, how do we reimagine a future where we're in harmony with nature, where we're
Mm.
actually working together to make sure that nature is conserved, that it's restored, because without it, there's not us, and there's no economy. Without nature, there's no economy, right? I think I was, and I'll leave you with this little anecdote. So the European business. European Central Bank last year looked at all 4.2 million loans they have across the Eurozone. They found that 75% of them were exposed to nature loss. That's $4.3 trillion of exposure on their balance
Mhm.
sheet. Do you think they're happy about that?
Yeah. Wow. Wow.
No. So
It's
there's a
big.
real opportunity. Yeah,
Yeah,
huge.
living, so let's take care of this great mother that we're on. Let's be better guests and let's live in harmony with her and not try and take from her, is I
Yeah.
think what I'm hearing. So, Richard, thank you. This has been a really eye-opening and important conversation. Thank you for being my guest today.
My pleasure, Andrea. It's always a real pleasure to spend time with you. Thanks for having
Yeah,
me.
thank you. And thank you to everybody who joined us here today. I'm sure that you took a lot away from it. And I know I'm going to go back and listen to this because so much of what Richard said today is complex. This is not a small issue. And I think we all have to understand it on a much deeper level. And so make sure you do that. Go back and re-listen to what Richard talked about today and look at your own business and how can you leave your house a little better than you found it. And make sure to join me in 2 weeks on April the, no, I don't know the date, but 2 weeks from now, where I will be interviewing Jeremy Miller, who is a speaker, an author, and the founder of Sticky Branding. And we're going to be talking about why branding is having an identity crisis. And if you haven't heard, I'm also having a masterclass on Tuesday, April the 30th, all about branding. So make sure you join us. We'll put the link into the chat below. And Richard, is there anywhere that people can keep in touch with you?
The best is, to go to faunaphotonics.com, which is our biodiversity technology company, and you can find me there. We
Okay.
think we've created something really unique.
Really important. So make
Yeah.
sure to visit Richard and Fauna Photonics at faunaphotonics.com. We will put that into the show notes as well. And make sure you follow him on LinkedIn. Richard posts some really amazing things on a regular basis. Thank you for joining us. And we will be here in 2 weeks on May 10th with Jeremy Miller on Conversations with Thought Leaders. Have an amazing weekend, everybody. Thanks again, Richard.
Yeah. Thanks you. Bye.